everyone, and welcome to another DevOps Unbound Roundtable. My name is Alan Schimmel, CEO of Media Ops, people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, TechStrong TV, Container Journal. Let me introduce you to our panel. I'm going to start off with my co-host, and as he was here longer, I'm going to ask him to kick things off today. Mitchell, if you wouldn't mind introducing our panel and getting us started.
Happy to. We're some returning players and a new one here, so we're happy to really have everybody join us today. Some truly experts in the field here. So I'd like to have everybody introduce themselves. Raven, why don't you kick it off? Tell us a little bit about you and what kind of work you do.
Awesome. I am the application, can you hear me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm the application developer and DevOps engineer for the Smithsonian Institution, but for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And mainly my job is, one, to create the interactives that you play with in the museum, as well as to guide my leadership on policy and process for DevOps.
Excellent. And Mike Murray, who is a returning player here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike, and you're coming from the medical industry.
Absolutely. So Mike Murray, been in security forever, know these guys for a long time. But these days, I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Scope Security. We do XDR and managed detection and response for hospitals and health systems. But more germane to this conversation is I spent a bunch of time in the medical device industry, and especially early on in GE Healthcare's life cycle of trying to go from a very traditional waterfall development process around regulated devices to an agile process that looked a lot like what we do for modern DevOps. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of that knowledge with you all.
Excellent. And Raj.
Thank you, Mitch. Great to be here. So quick background about me is that today I head a company called Narwhal, which operates in automation, DevOps, data, and cloud. Sort of comes all together when you're implementing DevOps or automation. Background, started as a developer 20 plus years ago, then steadily grew into application manager, director, senior leader roles. Along the way, I've sort of played different roles being in the development environment, got exposed to QA and other aspects of the entire software development life cycle. So I have that unique background that that I have been able to derive this insights, having the breadth, playing variety of roles in the software development life cycle, be it developer, managed QA, and then project management, left to right. So at the same time, from developer to the senior leader roles, working with developer level at the same time that the senior leadership level, trying to implement DevOps. I've led DevOps at enterprise scales at one of the Fortune 500 highly regulated environments, engineering tools, DevOps, and QA transformation, and so bring that experience as well. Now as Narwhal, we are growing fast in these areas that I talked about. Some of our major clients are also sort of connect to this topic, right? So highly regulated, be it healthcare, be it finance and banking, and also insurance. So it's exciting to be here talking about it, also from learning from other speakers here.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah, to Alan, want to mention that we're sponsored by Tricentis, our friends, good folks there, who sponsored DevOps Unbound. So we're happy about that. Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about the platform? Kind of tell everybody.
Yeah, let's welcome our watchers, our listeners, our attendees beyond the panel. So we've got a great panel lined up for you today. I think we're gonna have a great discussion, but these discussions are only as good as you are out in the audience. I see some of you have checked in from Eagle, Idaho, and Kissimmee, Florida. We're down here in Florida too. New York City, New Jersey, all over. Feel free to log in and say hi from wherever you are. We do use the Big Marker webinar platform. We like it. There's no There's no plugins. There's no downloads. It runs right in your browser. I want to turn your attention, though, to the communications panel, as I call it, which for most of you is on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see up top it says chat, QA, polls, handouts, etc. For most of you, you're going to be concerned with two sections: the chat section and the Q&A section. Chat section, as many of you are already seeing, if you in public, you can put your chat up there, and people can. Everyone who's attending can see it. If that doesn't mean, you can't ask people private questions, though there is private chat. I caution you, private chat doesn't mean ask someone, do they come to these webinars often? Not the right use for it. But if you have a question, there's a presenters section as well. But if you have a question for our presenters, for our panel, use the Q&A section, right? If you go to Q&A, you can put your question to us in there, and we're happy to answer them. And I will tell you that throughout this roundtable today, I will be going there to grab questions from the audience for our panel. And we like, this is a very open-ended conversation. We're looking to hear what you think and what you want to talk about and what you would like us to maybe touch on. So please use the chat and the Q&A sections from that. That being said, let's jump into things. So when I first started DevOps.com back in 2013, we launched 2014, there was a raging argument of, is DevOps something that should be used for startups or for large enterprises? But the prevailing wisdom was, you don't use DevOps in something like government or highly regulated industries. It was too Wild West. There weren't enough rules, wasn't enough oversight, wasn't locked down. And so those would be the laggards when it came to DevOps. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to DevOps Nirvana is that these highly regulated industries, finance, healthcare, and government, we've got representation on all three here today, really began to lead the way in DevOps adoption, right? They needed DevOps because their use cases demanded DevOps. They had to do more faster, better, more automation, but they couldn't sacrifice security and compliance issues, right? No one was going to give them a pass on HIPAA compliance or GDPR or anything else that we can think of dealing with government. So let's talk about that. Mike Murray, I'm going to pick on you first. You've been doing healthcare and healthcare security for 15 years or more, right?
A long time.
A long time. He's not as young as he looks, but so Mike, why has DevOps sort of found solid footing in healthcare, or has it?
So I think you have to remember there's multiple different facets of what we call healthcare, right? If we're talking about hospitals and health systems, they're not really usually software development shops the way a lot of other organizations are. And so the function of DevOps within a hospital looks a lot more like system design and sort of, IT system deployment than it does traditional DevOps. But where I think DevOps has actually had a really big impact is in the development of medical technology, specifically medical devices. And the really interesting challenge for a medical device manufacturer comes from FDA regulations. And FDA regulations have traditionally required and do require a traceability from the design requirements of the product to the actual delivered product, which, to Alan, to your point, in the early days of Agile and DevOps and that sort of, you called it the Wild West, the medical device manufacturers believed that this was something to stay away from. We can't have traceability of requirements if people are just running around doing all this crazy stuff and deploying 12 to I literally remember a conversation where someone said to me, we can never deploy 12 times a day like Yelp does. And it was it was such an interesting thing, because now if you go inside a lot of those organizations, they've embraced DevOps as a way to accomplish the goals, right? Now, the processes look a little bit different than, you know, if you go to DevOps at a Bay Area, Silicon Valley startup, it looks a little different in the way it's implemented inside of a medical device manufacturer. But the instrumentation and the testing and the regularity of checking in on those requirements and ensuring that they're still being met is actually making it easier for those device manufacturers to hit those targets rather than harder. And I think that that's been a surprise to a lot of people who came from a very traditional waterfall place.
Fair enough. Raven, I've spoken to you numerous times, and I know there are challenges. Even though the Smithsonian is sort of quasi-governmental, right? But you face real challenges that kind of hinder how fast you can go, right? Let's talk about it.
We absolutely do. I like what you said, Mike, about like it not looking the same, like it doesn't look the same. And Alan, when you said that people didn't see the value of DevOps, the thing that it helps us with is, one, we have 2 layers of security that we have to go through. We have OCIO, which is our Chief Information Office, because we host applications at that layer. And then the museum itself is on its own network. And so when I do interactives, I have to figure out whether or not, like, how to use DevOps and security from there. And then we also have a lot of contract work. So a lot of our products, because we're not a software development house, we have to figure out how to be consistent with the way we do our DevOps process across different vendors and contractors that are actually making these products for us. And it really is a challenge, because we can't be prescriptive of how we decide what tools you can use and what tools you can't use, but everything is on our servers. And so we have to have some type of control of how to pass these security things. Our biggest hang up for making sure that we can be efficient are the stakeholders. Actually, when we get to the testing part of developing a product, our stakeholders actually hold us up, because they've got to approve of everything that they see before it moves on to the next level. And our stakeholders are wide and varied. It's fun, but not.
It's challenging. It's a challenge, and we all live for a challenge.
Yes.
Raj, how about you? You know, you're dealing with in your position, you're dealing, of course, with multiple clients, right? Multiple customers across finance and other verticals. Where do you see kind of the rub, but not only the advantages of why people are adopting DevOps in these highly regulated industries?
Thank you, Alan. I mean, you talked about it, right? So when you started in 2013, it was a different mindset. I think we are well past that. I think everybody that I talk to understands to a certain degree and appreciates the value of DevOps, but definitely there is a challenge in when you're implementing DevOps in a smaller organization versus larger than highly regulated and then more complex organizations, right? So I mean, naturally, so today we have 3 of our largest clients are banking and financial, insurance, and healthcare, and perfectly covers highly regulated environment, right? So and I personally have led DevOps at enterprise scale and managed the engineering tools at a finance and payments Fortune 500 company. See, the appreciation is there, desire is there, everybody wants to go fast. It's just the organizations are so big, and the culture, you have disparate applications from 40, 50-year-old mainframe assembler to latest and greatest in cloud and innovation going on. And then you talk about the QA environments, a multitude of QA environments. You talk about the tools, for everything there is 5 other tools doing exactly the same thing. Talk about, for example, QA automation, there will be 5 to 10 tools. Now, when you are, let's say, let's just take a small example, right? So in a typical DevOps, let's say take automation as the test automation, the first thing, right? So to automate, Now, when you're trying to automate and integrate with other tools, if you have one automation tool, then you have CI tools, CD tools, and a bunch of other tools. There is like 5 to 10 integrations. Then take it like you have 5 automation tools, multiply that with 50, right? That's just one complexity. Second thing is the people complexity, which is the most difficult part, people and culture. You have to bring people together and align. Even to date, I believe there is a different understanding of what everybody thinks about DevOps. What you think of DevOps is not what I think of DevOps. We've made huge progress along the way over the last several years. So it's getting that right, getting alignment. Everybody understands where we are going, and then building that is a complex thing. I don't know it's about highly regulated thing that's sort of slows us down. It's a complexity of the organization, the people, culture, all these, right? So, but the value is there. The more complex the organization, the higher the value, in my opinion, of implementing automation and DevOps.
Excellent. So we've got our first question from the audience, and I think it's a good one. Justin asks, how do you deal with objections from like the VP C-suite folks over the organizational cost versus the ROI of the refactors that's necessary to do things like a 12-factor, with your legacy apps, right? And really, for me, this boils down, and there's, again, kind of an age-old question in DevOps. Can you do DevOps without top cover, without air cover, right? Does it have to be top-down blessed, if not actually top-down initiated? Going to be bottom-up, middle-out? Raven, in your organization, I'm sure you deal with this.
Yes. To address your last comment first about whether it has to be top down or middle or whatever, the way DevOps was implemented in our organization, and even with OCIO, our enterprise organization, it was from I don't want to say that the developers are the bottom. We're not the bottom, but it was implemented from us and wanting to have a way to be more consistent in the way we develop. And so what happened was to be able to prove the case, and not necessarily for ROI on our point, because we don't actually have to deal with that so much, was to prove the case of how we could be more performant and how we could get our products from development to launch. That was actually what was important. And what was cool is that we're kind of like a startup where we don't have legacy. We don't have legacy products. We're a new museum, so everything is brand new. So that is great from a DevOps perspective, because you can just start with a blank slate. Raj, you have it straight on, because when you're starting with a blank slate, then you've got like 15,000 tools to actually choose from how you want to do it. But because we don't have anything to fall back on to prove that this stuff works, that it was really hard to get over for our leadership, was because we don't have proof. So they had to take it on faith that, yes, if we did this thing, then we would be able to have this particular outcome. It's been whether or not we've been able to prove, because some of the metrics are not there. We can't actually kind of prove that we have improvement because some of it's qualitative. And so, but since it's a buzzword, our C-suite is like, oh, okay, that's going on out there in the industry, so it must be good. So that actually kind of helps. So it's been a challenge with that.
Wondering, Raj, Mike, any thoughts or comments on that issue?
Absolutely. So I know you said that you started out the question with ROI, from VP standpoint, ROI and organizational cost. Can you elaborate on organizational cost? So I want to understand, because when I think about ROI, take everything into equation and then ROI, right? So both organizational and financial, tangible and intangible costs, right? So, but I just want to understand quickly, you mean people cost, the sort of getting people to sort of align and, get onboarded with the idea, or Alan?
I'm listening.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand organizational cost from your standpoint. can you elaborate what do you mean by organizational cost?
I think I can jump in a little bit on that too, Raj. This is a question from Justin in the audience. Justin, if you're welcome to chime in.
Justin just answered, Mitch.
Oh, he did. There he did.
Yeah.
So the comparative
he says
engineering
the comparative engineering cost of refactoring code.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, thank you. So my experience has been this, right? So we talk about this all the time. Do we start from bottom up, top down, big bang, all sorts of things, right? So it all depends on the company. It all depends on the, the culture, the tools, processes, technologies in place in the company. It also depends on what level of maturity we are talking about the company is already at, right? So I think one approach is to start with a few teams who are willing and early adopters. So in a matter of few months, you can start with the low-hanging fruit, automate where possible, automate your testing, which is a low-hanging fruit generally and easy to implement. Then take it from CI/CD, CD, pipelines go from there, right? So what I've done is, when you do this at a grassroots level, getting some early adopters, you sort of excite the rest of the organization. There is always a skepticism in the parts of the organization. They don't want to be the first ones to go, right? So they want to see, how somebody else can do it. So when you take on these early adopters and demonstrate the success and sort of show it to everybody, you're exciting the rest of the organization. You're also starting at the grassroots level. You get a better adoption from other developers and the teams, but at the same time, you also have to come from top down. You have to have executive champions. You have to have change leaders, a strong support and encouragement and from the executive levels down.
Yeah, if I can jump in on this too, Raj. Justin asked the question, sort of the right way to do DevOps. It's sort of one of the blessings and the curses of DevOps is there's no manifesto. There's no right way to do it. And that's also a plus because everyone is in a different place. And you may start out as a greenfield, total, wide open. You can pick from the plethora of tools. You may be starting as a sort of a skunk work of how you start DevOps and then scale it up into the organization. But at some point, you have to adapt to how the organization works, and you're not going to transform the whole culture and suddenly become a DevOps culture, in the next century. I mean, it's not practical because I think as we were pointing out in our conversation, it's not just one app. I like to say no app is an island, right? Everything talks to something else, gets data from it, talks to devices, has a mobile app for it or whatever. And so we have to adapt DevOps to multiple streams of how we work. Mainframe, may have the inventory system or manufacturing systems or ERP, whatever it might be, that we have to coordinate releases with something that might be cloud native or might be a mobile app. So it's not always about how do we refactor all the existing things. It's how do we create flows into releasing or deploying capabilities across multiple work streams. It's my experience.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It's not there is no one size fits all. There is no one formula, and it's understanding and adapting and implementing your own flavor of what meaningful to you. Ultimately, what is DevOps, right? So automate from end to end, and there is a cultural aspect of it. There is a the speed and smaller batches, more frequent delivery. So there is that getting those fundamentals right. However you get them, right. So the speed to market, ultimately accomplishing that speed to market, higher quality, ROI automatically comes with that.
So I wanted to throw something in that to Justin's original question, but also to what Raj just said that I think is something we haven't talked about, which is that if you're looking for that air cover from the top, you have to align with what the organization's goals are, right? And Raj, you just brought up quality of code, speed to market, all of those things that could be the organization's goals. But the question is, what is the organization's goal? If you're trying to overcome the objections of the VP and the C-suite from Justin's original question, the easiest way for any of my people to convince me to invest in a project is to tie it to something I'm already trying to make the company do, right? If we're trying to get to market faster, how does your DevOps project get me to market faster? If it's quality, how does it reduce bugs? And so So I think there's an understanding of what does that VP or C-suite actually want? What are they measuring and what are they trying to accomplish? And how does whatever you're going to propose accomplish that goal?
Mike, that's a very, very powerful point. And I I say that because I lived through that moment, and I know this is the place a lot of organizations struggle. Yeah. You talk at the developer level, if you don't mind jumping me, Alan and Mike and Mitch here, for a minute, is that, everybody, you talk to these passionate developers that want to do it. You talk to, C-suites, they want to do it. Then why does it not work, right? So, because the problem is, on a VP level, C-suite level are thinking about sort of multi-year, what is the cost? So me ROI, I am all ready to invest, but I just need to understand a little bit better from that standpoint, like how Mike brought it up from CEO perspective. I want to do this, but cost and ROI, just vague sense, not, don't have to show me exact dollars and stuff, even in some cases. But, and then there is a lower level part of the organization. There is a passion, there is understanding. DevOps is a great thing, but specifically in this particular case, in this particular company, for these set of apps, translate it and show me. I will give you $1 million investment, and then over 2, 3, 4 years that we get 2 times ROI or something. That's where there is a skill gap or capability gap, whatnot. Nobody, having people put that thing in there and then show it and then bridge the gap between the sort of top and bottom, or however you call it, right? So brings it together in my view, and that's a difficult thing as easy as it sounds sometimes.
Raj, that's actually a good point. When you were talking, the one thing that came to mind was the fact that, one, DevOps is sort of new. It's only new because it's been packaged as DevOps, right? It's been happening before. But when you have the people who are the implementers in place already, who have been doing the development and whatever, and doing the system admin the way they've been doing, so you add DevOps and they want to do it, but don't know how. They've not, like you said, they don't know how, and that skill set, they don't actually have it. So trying to prove that this will work is really dependent on whether or not that team can actually ramp up fast enough to be able to make the point. Like you have the C-suite, they have to understand that this is great, but you're like, these people can actually do it. They just need to ramp up and find the right thing for the way to be able to do it. And I think that that's actually makes a difference, because the vision has to be bigger. You can't just say, give me this amount of money and show me in 3 years. It might take about 1.5 years just to get to the right place with the tools and the people and the skills and all that good stuff to prove it. And then the metrics are missing.
Yeah, I want to tie a couple things together, what you just said, Raven, and I'll be a little controversial here. ROI are sort of like analyst reports. We use them to our benefit, right? We use them to get our projects justified. And I'm an analyst, so I know how our stuff gets used, right? It gets put into a presentation. We make the numbers and our ROI thing work. Nobody ever goes back and says, okay, you're going to get promoted because you hit that ROI number. Maybe you do in some cases, but most of the times it doesn't happen. That's sort of the justification to get support. It's not the outcome truly of what you end up happening. What the outcome is, what you were talking about, Mike, is what's the business trying to achieve, and can you measurably show how you contributed to that in some way? And it may not be, 80% of it, maybe 2% of it, but you make an immeasurable impact to that. So ultimately, I think that's, there's a lot of aspects of DevOps, and we're talking about in regulated industries here. So there's other ways we might look at it too. This is an area we're doing some research in around compliance. Is DevOps helping you respond to compliance issues, either reducing the number of issues you have or shortening the gap, the time to respond to those issues? I happen to be rereading the Phoenix Project for we're doing this as part of a team project that I'm on. And it's interesting is that there's a compliance audit issue around that whole thing. And the biggest issue is so much of it is not even really relevant. It's like, what's the really relevant, important things around compliance and audit that you really can impact and make a difference on? So I think what I'm trying to say is ultimately it's about what's really important. Not what's important to IT, but what's important to the business, whether that's customers, employees, partners, and the outcomes we're trying to get through software and products and technologies.
Excellent. Hey guys, I need to bring us back on track here though, because we went off. Justin, thanks for that line of thoughts that you invoked here, and good discussion. But let's bring it back to the highly regulated environment. As counterintuitive as it is, DevOps has thrived in highly regulated environments. And it's counterintuitive. It's led the way, right? And why, and what does that mean for the future of these highly regulated environments, right? Can it help? Can it help avoid the next ransomware, the next software supply chain attack, right? Can it help government process local government process unemployment checks faster if we ever have a situation like that, right? These are the kinds of things where, DevOps should be able to help if we let it.
Can I disagree with you, Alan?
Sure, disagreement is healthy. You can go for it.
And it really actually depends on what your thought process is around that DevOps has thrived in the highly regulated environment. Because I think if we're talking about DevSecOps and you're talking about security, it actually has stumbled a little bit because a lot of the tools, just the tools themselves, are open source, and that has made security a little bit harder because now we've got to look at, as from a developer, the packages. There's no licensing. Some of the stuff isn't maintained. A lot of the whole ecosystem, like the whole CMS, is totally open source and never needs a community. And so when an organization is using DevOps, the processes, they have actually helped because, and I was talking with Justin in the Q&A, that when you adopt Agile, you actually help yourself to go to DevOps. So you've already have everything built in and all the testing is already built in. But even if you're nice and streamlined, when you add these open source concerns, it slows it down because now you have to figure out how to revamp your security around these things. Even things like containers were supposed to be like, this will help us with security. But then the containers themselves, that software, now has actual problems. So I have to disagree a little bit that it hasn't really helped and highly regulated when you're looking at the security part of DevOps.
Fair, Mike. I have my views on this, but I'm going to let you guys chime in a bit before I chime in.
Yeah. So I always stick my head back into medical devices, right? Because that's kind of where my head goes naturally. And I think that the one thing that exists in the traditional way that these products were designed and developed and has changed in the last few years. And Alan, I am answering your question just in a bit of a roundabout way, is that the regulations require reviews at certain steps of the process. And if you are doing a 3 or 5 year development project and you have a review every 9 months, it takes a long time to see if you've made a mistake, to see if if you have to go back and rework things. And I think what you see DevOps bringing to this process, if nothing else, if you take aside all of the sort of ancillary benefits of better testing and better quality and things like that, is just forcing organizations to be aware of their development process on a time scale that's not 9 months long, but is 9 hours long. And so mistakes don't propagate. Mistakes don't have incredible downstream consequences that last for quarters at a time, because you catch them every day through, continuous integration, continuous build testing, all of those sorts of things. And it speeds up the cycle time and ultimately does lead to better quality just through having that observability and having that tight feedback loop. And I think that, you know, you can argue about a lot of the other things, but just doing that well has really increased the ability of most people building regulated products to, you know, to keep control of their process more effectively.
I don't disagree. Raj, you wanted to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'll keep it short and you know, and keep it a bit high level, right? So, you know, you both are right, you know, as Raven, you know, disagreeing, and Alan, you're making a statement. It all you know, depends on the context, right? So looking at it from high level, yes, I mean, it should help. And you know, essentially, you know, DevOps, boil it down to one word, you know, even continuous improvement, right? So, you know, you take a process and how do you continually improve it? You know, any process can be better, right? So especially with automation, especially with, you know, getting the flows right and understanding it well. But then there are going to be aspects of, you know, your business and security, and you only do it probably once in 6 months, and then automating it takes 6 months. Then you have to question, is it worthwhile doing it? You know what, I have 100 tasks. Let me focus on the 20 tasks that gives me 80% of return versus this one task that is going to make everybody miserable and then, you know, get demotivated, right? So, you know, while not getting into the details, that's my view, right? So a lot of times at developer level, a perfectionist, typically some developers who are passionate are also perfectionists, and they want to get everything right, and they lose sleep over some of these things. Whereas taking a slightly higher approach and, you know what, let go of this, understand the end-to-end ecosystem and say, you know, I got good parts of it. It's better than 6 months ago, 1 year ago. I got good parts of it automated and got into a better place. So I know I'm, you know, sort of at conceptual level at this place, but I would come from that place and, you know, not go into, you know, a lot of times, you know, both parties are right and we are arguing, right? So
no, go ahead.
Can I jump in? I had a question about this, Alan, because Mike sort of hinted at it when he said reviews. Two words we haven't used typically within a regulated environment are compliance and governance. And that's where the, you know, that's where the pain increases, if you want to think of it that way. And so I'm really curious from everyone's perspective, is that gotten easier? Has that gotten better because of DevOps? Is it the same? I can't imagine it's more difficult because, you know, adding more pain and effort to meet compliance requirements is probably not going to support DevOps being adoptive. But what's everyone's experience with that? Is it helping?
Anybody?
I stumped the panel.
So I would say, look, governance and compliance was never easy, right? It's hard. If it wasn't hard, we'd all be doing it better. Has it appreciably improved? I don't know. I mean, you know, applying DevOps principles, geez, can we automate governance and compliance? I don't know if I'm going to live that long, you know, quite frankly. If you guys have instances of it, great, but I don't, you know, I have seen DevOps enabled, you know, GRC tools that claim to do so. I can't sit here and tell you they work or not. So I mean, that would be my take, Mike.
Can I throw in a plug? I'm gonna
Sure.
plug a favorite business partner of mine, because actually we've been using one of those specific tools. There's a little startup company called Drata that does automated SOC 2 compliance and continuous monitoring around some of that GRC stuff. And I will say, having led many compliance processes in my life, this new automatically integrated into all of our cloud services, constant testing. I literally get an update every morning from that tool chain about what things have gone out of compliance in our organization and how to fix them that morning. right? Rather than waiting, you know, for my auditor to show up 90 days from now and give me a spreadsheet full of those things, I get a Slack message every morning that tells me that. And so I don't think that, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that that's a solved problem, but I think that the direction that some of those tools are going is fascinating. And it really does. It's exactly the same thing I was saying about shortening the cycle time between reviews. It shortens the cycle time between compliance reviews. Like in the old days, you'd have to wait for monthly scans or that to find out that you were out of compliance. Now it's like quick iteration, quick turnover, and quick feedback on the mistakes that you're making. And I think that that's I wouldn't have ever called it DevOps until this conversation, but actually a lot of the principles are similar.
No, great. It is. Hey, I just want to, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, we do give out 4 Amazon gift cards at all of these roundtables. I think they're $25 each. Today's winners are David T, Justin R, looks like Lisa, I think it's Lise F, and Mallory C. Our team will be in touch with you and get you out your gift cards. Congratulations. Let's come back to it. You know, Raven said something before that I wanted to jump on, but I wanted to let the conversation play out a little bit. And that is around the use of open source. You know, I've heard this from folks other than Raven recently, where, you know, open source has become a little bit of a whipping boy because it has been a vector for some attacks, for some security incidents, right? Using open source, mostly using open source components within the applications we're building. However, you know, I remember having this discussion with Mitchell and Mike Murray and Mike Rothman and Chris Hoff 20 years ago. You know, is open source more secure than, we used to call it closed source then? I don't know if that's still the right term, or commercial, right? I don't know if you can make the argument that open source hasn't been a tremendous accelerant, catalyst for DevOps, for digital transformation, for the cloud, for everything that we've built our technology foundation on today. So much of it is on open source. Now, for that very reason, you're probably going to have more security issues, right? Microsoft Windows had more security issues because they controlled 95% of the desktop OS market. Lo and behold, Mac got a little bit more of the market share, and they started having problems. If Linux desktop ever took off, and I know next year will be the year of Linux desktop again, right? We're going to have security issues on Linux desktop too. It's the nature of the beast, right? So I don't, you know, I think open source has been such a force of good within software, within IT, within technology and digital transformation. You know, I think the security issues have been, yes, they're real, but we shouldn't lose sight of them in the big picture.
I agree. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are without open source. I wonder if what Raven was referring to is, you remember the day when the debate about open source is, but it's not supported in the way we know how software is normally supported. And so explaining that to your organization, getting your head around that, it sounded like there were similar kind of issues for the rigor of process that Raven, you might have been referring to. Is that some of the questions about open source and why that's been challenging? Or has it been more of the security vulnerability issues that have presented a challenge for you?
I think Raven might be having some camera and or audio.
Yeah, her camera wasn't working. I thought her audio was, but maybe not.
Okay.
Looks like not either. Okay. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think that the challenge with open source a lot of the time, and this is going to be an old reference, and I apologize. I don't know if you all, I'm sure at least Mitch and Alan probably remember Perl and CPAN. and how much of a spaghetti mess the Perl community became after a few years. And I think, especially if you're not used to open source, sometimes open source can be this broad landscape of what's good, what isn't. You know, did I just download Apache, or did I download Joe Bob's free web server, 0.11? And so, for those of us who've been around the open source community for a long time, I think we take for granted how big and scary a land it can be if you haven't lived in it for the last 20 years. And I think that that's not something that we think about a lot, but it's definitely something that if you're coming to this new, and if you're coming to this from a place where that's not where you came from, it's a daunting landscape sometimes.
It can be. It certainly can be. Though I got to tell you that with the advent of things like the Linux Foundation, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, etc., open source today, Mike, is very different than the open source that we were using, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when it was more of a DIY kit or do-it-yourself DIY kit. I got a little dyslexic there. I'm sorry. It was very DIY. You couldn't use open source out of the box, so to speak. Where today, it's slick, right? You got all of these components and stuff where you're assembling, whether you want to call it low code, no code, or Frankenstein or whatever. You assemble apps by putting modules together like Minecraft stuff. Raj, I'm wondering, what are you seeing in your working with customers and so forth in regard to open source, and especially in regulated industries, right? There was a long time where regulated industries said, "Oh, we can't use open source."
Right. Yeah, obviously I'm not a security expert, but
forget the security expert. Yeah.
What I see myself when I'm working with these companies, obviously they tighten the controls, right? So they make sure that the clients that I work with, be it payments and insurance, healthcare, and they tighten their ecosystem network quite a bit. Even to a point that, let's say, if I'm on one of my clients' network, I can't access Google because you can easily upload code or download code. It's more of a security from that stand. That's one aspect of it. And also, I believe, we're not talking about every developer downloading whatever software they want, just going to the Google and download, right? So I think we're probably talking about, some, good open source software. It's still open source, but, sort of established to a degree, right? So typically the companies have the certification process, vetting process, they can approve, and then you can go through. I understand it's a long process compared to a startup. You go ask your boss, or you just download and do it, versus here you have to wait a little bit and you have to go through that. So I don't see the companies, these insurance healthcare companies, completely, not, shutting it down. That's not the case. There is a process, and that takes time. But also they tighten it up to a point that you can just go download whatever you want and do it as well, right? So I believe that's a good balance. When you have 50,000, 100,000 people company, you just cannot control, right? So there are things happen and the damage is too high. So where do you draw the balance? So I feel there is a reason for those controls, but at the same time, striking the right balance between the speed and efficiency and all of that, and then at the same time letting people do what they want to do, right? So
sure.
I hope I answered your question, at least.
Yeah, no, I was just wanted to give us your experience, and that's what we could do. We're coming up, towards the end of this. I'm not sure. I know Raven had camera issues. I'm not sure if her audio is on.
She's rebooting to try to rejoin us.
Oh, okay. I wanted to give her a chance to say some last words, but I wanted to go around to each of you and, kind of last words of advice to the audience. If you're dealing in highly regulated industries, we realize there are challenges. DevOps is just one aspect of it, right? We live in regulated industries. we work in them, and they create challenges. What advice can you give to the folks out there who maybe you're not struggling, but are, this is their life. They're living these challenges day in, day out. Mike, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to go first again.
Happily. I think the best message that I can put out there is that the instinct, and it's something that Raj was just saying, the instinct to drive security is always to try and limit what you're doing and try and be as conservative as possible and go back to the old tried and true ways. And I think that that is exactly the wrong approach. The idea that I'm going to stop everyone from doing anything bad by never letting anybody on my network go to Google or go to Facebook or go to Twitter was a really great idea in about 1997. And I think it's an idea that we've kind of lost the point of, and there are better ways. And DevOps is one of those things, right? This is not about replacing an old process that everybody's used to with some Wild West crazy cowboy, hey, move fast and break things, yay, yeehaw kind of thing. This is about taking modern software development practices and applying them to an environment that could sorely benefit from it. We have a lot of these regulated devices take years and years and years to build. And how much better off would we be if we could use modern software development practices to shorten those release cycles by half? It means life-saving technologies get built more quickly, vulnerabilities get patched more quickly, and ultimately it lowers risk for everyone to do this. It doesn't raise your risk, and that's what everybody's afraid of. We're afraid that we're going to adopt these new practices and it will raise our risk. And it's exactly the opposite. And I want to get to that through. If you come away from one thing that I said, just realize this is the way you reduce risk, not the way you add it.
Fair enough. I agree. Raj?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So yeah, I think going back to basics, right? So I think, it's sometimes surprising that here we are in 2021 still talking about, is DevOps right? Should we do it? Should we go? That thing is, I think, long past in my opinion. I think everybody believes in it. It's just that we all run into some, sort of, road bumps here, right? So, trying to get that right, and then it's proven. One of the early Puppet reports and all of that. I mean, I'm sure you talked about in previous roundtables as well. Whatever, 440 times, faster lead times, and 96% times fewer defects. There are all sorts of crazy numbers out there that, that I'm passionate about DevOps for one reason. It's a game changer. It's not just an incremental improvements. It's not 10, 20, 30%. It's a several 100,000% improvement type of thing, right? So I think it's a no-brainer, but it's just that, when we come into these highly regulated environments, and again, my advice is, start small and demonstrate early success, and then, show it to the rest of the company and excite everybody, and take it from there, right? So yes, I mean, all this security and other things will slow you down, and you get into arguments and sort of people get discouraged. But I think keeping that larger context in mind, and yeah, keep moving forward.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I think it's easy for all of us to fall, I do, fall into the technical aspect, the tool aspect, the tool chains, etc., part of DevOps, and forget that what DevOps is really about is applying a lot of disciplines from Toyota manufacturing, total quality management, lean, things like that. And if you go back to the 3 ways of DevOps, the idea of managing workflow and being really clear about what work keeps you moving forward and prevents work from backing up or causing you to move backwards, creating shorter, faster feedback loops, so you can, like Mike was talking about earlier, so you can find out things like compliance issues much earlier before you actually do it. Compliance. It's all the reasons we do continuous integration, right? So we don't have issues 3 weeks from now. We fix it the moment it happens. And then, of course, with the business loves too is continued experimentation, at least the ability to do that and respond quickly, but do it in small bites, do it in small incremental elements. That's really what DevOps is about. And if you took the label away and you went to your leadership and said, hey, I have some things that would help us, it's really process kind of stuff. That'll help us get software a lot faster. We can experiment. We can learn what's happening in market or with the things that we're attempting to do very quickly. They're going to say, well, of course, yeah, I'm interested in that, So I think if we go back to the fundamentals, that is very much in line with a highly regulated environment, some of the challenges that we have.
Yep. I don't think Raven is back on, so we're going to wrap up without her. Let me close us off with this. If you're out there in a regulated environment and you're thinking about doing DevOps, are doing DevOps, have done DevOps, you are not alone. There are plenty of people who have done it. There are plenty of organizations that have looked at the challenges and overcome them. And there are lots of resources out there that can help you. There are a lot of companies, there are a lot of vendors, there are a lot of white papers, videos, webinars that can help you on this issue. Do not, let it overwhelm you or, paralysis by analysis type of thing here where it becomes, too big a job. DevOps can help. It will help. It does help. And you too can do it, at your place, no matter the regulations. With that, I'm going to end things. Look, DevOps Unbound is a video series that we do every other week. We'll be back on in 2 weeks. May not be with a live roundtable, but you can catch it on our TechStrong TV broadcast, as well as at digitalanarchist.com or on any of the media ops sites, devops.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal. Raj, thank you so much for joining with us. Mike Murray, always a pleasure, my friend, to see you.
Thanks again for having us.
Thank you. Raven Manuel, I'm sorry you had problems there at the end, but you always bring so much to all of these when we have you on. Mitchell, as always, what can I say? Thanks for holding down the fort here and helping me. And many thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring DevOps Unbound. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel. Have a great day, everyone. Be well, be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Mitch.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.